You're listening to the Worldly Marketer podcast, brought to you by Verbacino.com. Welcome to the Worldly Marketer podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Bussman. In the digital age, even small brands can build a worldwide customer base. If you've been thinking about expanding your business into foreign markets, but you're not sure where to start, this is the show for you. Every week, I talk to a different expert to learn more about the challenges and the rewards of participating in today's increasingly digital, social, and multilingual marketplace. Join me as I explore this brave new world of global possibilities. My guest today is the head of the NewComm Global Group, a Silicon Valley-based international management consulting firm that has been specializing in global business success for more than 20 years. Focusing on the B2B technology and services sector, my guest helps her clients grow their brands and revenue streams worldwide, including in emerging markets. A former resident of both the UK and South Africa, my guest specializes in the EMEA and ASEAN regions, working with leaders such as Cisco, IBM, Johnson & Johnson, and the US State Department, as well as startups and governments. In addition to her role at NewComm Global, my guest has been on the advisory board of Brand to Global, a leading global marketing and international brands conference. She also continues to serve as a mentor and advocate with the U.S. Department of State's Tech Women program, with the group Impact Hub Harare, and she has advised accelerators in Malaysia and Kyrgyzstan. My guest is a frequent public speaker on the subject of global business, and she has been recognized as a Women of Influence honoree by the Silicon Valley Business Journal. You can catch her at the upcoming South by Southwest 2017 event, where she will be a panelist on her favorite topic, public diplomacy. Lucie Newcomb, welcome to the Worldly Marketer podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to our conversation.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. It really is. It's a great honor because you have been in global business for 2 decades now, and you have so much experience to impart. I can't wait to get started. So, Lucie, I was hoping that just to get a bit of a sense of who you are and why you do what you do, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from originally, your cultural influences growing up, which languages you speak, and your educational background.
Well, thank you. I have something of an accidental background for someone who is a strategic planning expert and speaks a lot about intentionality. My own background has a slightly different focus, but all points definitely connected. And I have been a globalist from the very beginning. Before it was popular, before my parents knew what to do with me, I definitely was always focused on a global arena. And one of the things I love about marketing in general and global marketing in particular is the way that it allows us to connect to so many different opportunities, organizations, individuals around the world. It's been an incredible privilege and a true delight to be able to match my career to my passion of connecting and empowering individuals and ecosystems worldwide. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. So my international career actually began through the American Marketing Association. I had been a marketer for about 10 years at that point. I came up through the public relations and communications channel. My very first job was when I was still in high school. I was hired to be the columnist for our local, which is now a large city in Silicon Valley, but in the beginning, Pleasanton was quite small. And I was the local columnist/liaison for the local newspaper and the high school. I suppose they expected me to spy on my friends, but it was more like happy birthday to so-and-so and that kind of thing. So that's really where I began communicating, connecting, and seeing things in a bigger way in terms of building partnerships that I've actually built my career upon, both in terms of writing and partnership building. So I went on from there to go to college, first at San Jose State and then Berkeley, and do well. And then for someone who had lived in suburbia really her whole life and not traveled too much, I always had this yearning to expand and to extend. And I went to school in the University of London for one summer, and that really sunk me hook, line, and sinker. I went on to work in London I suppose you would call it a gap year, but not quite, later on. And then 10 years into my career, as I began this topic, I'd been involved in marketing and really loved it for a long time. I got the opportunity to begin working overseas, and it chose me in a rather unusual way. I was head of community relations for our local chapter of the American Marketing Association. And at the national level, some really enterprising and brilliant individuals had created, with the fall of the Soviet Union, what they called the Checkmate Project. And so I began my career through the association as part of the team that went to help create a marketing consciousness and skills and mindset in what was actually Czechoslovakia, then is now two republics. And so it was unbelievable to meet with people who actually met as marketers underground. It was like a political party in a communist era. They had to meet underground. I helped to build a library collection at the University of St. Petersburg in Russia, and one professor there had spent an entire month's salary on a textbook which most college freshmen would just as soon find its way to the garbage can here. There was such a hunger and a passion for building a marketing ecosystem, for building a consciousness around goods and supply and demand, which, of course, in a communist era wasn't present. And that led to many other things, including much later to work in South Africa, which between Russia and South Africa built my emerging markets thread.
You are the president and chief executive officer at NewComm Global, and you're based in Silicon Valley. Can you tell me a bit more about NewComm Global? What kinds of services do you offer, and what kinds of problems do you solve for your clients? I mentioned that there are certain industries that you tend to work with more, namely the B2B technology and services sector. How do your clients find you, and how do you help them become more global?
NewComm Global actually was born in South Africa, and I was actually an accidental entrepreneur, despite the fact, as I said, I teach entrepreneurs now about business plans and being properly funded. My own path was actually quite different. I was hired and actually headhunted to go to South Africa at the end of apartheid and help a company that had been, like all companies there, isolated from the world market. And were wise enough to realize that once the door was flung back open to the globe, they might not be quite ready. So after I had the privilege of leading that particular initiative and those teams, I stayed. I didn't intend to stay at all. But there were so many opportunities available, and I did lots of work with everyone from IBM and Johnson & Johnson to the embassy and so forth. So I actually founded my company in South Africa and then continued on here. And the large thing we do is global business development. And so what I mean by that is helping companies, mostly here. We also do, in theory, FDI, foreign direct investment from other foreign companies into the U.S. and particularly Silicon Valley. But most of our business has been outside. Unfortunately, in 2008, we had our recession. The first thing to go was international. So fortunately, we had planned to diversify already, because one of the things I found, especially in working in emerging markets, is that we were doing far more than, quote, just marketing and sales and business development, which, although it's plenty complex, it's somewhat linear. For example, we finished a market research project and did the entire market entry strategy, which was multifaceted for Johnson & Johnson company in South Africa. One of the reasons that people found companies and entities in South Africa is that it's the gateway for the whole continent. It has great infrastructure. It allows for far better distribution than other opportunities. So we were doing a lot of cross-cultural, not just there, but particularly it came clear to me, we were doing a lot of hiring and recruiting, leadership development, some organizational development, cross-cultural communications, partnership management, a lot of other things. And so I actually went back to graduate school several years ago and got a leadership master's degree and pivoted the company from an international markets development agency to what we call global business success from the inside out. And our opening line on our website is, where is your company going to grow today? And how will you lead when you get there? And the idea is, it's hard enough to get into a new market But if we go with what we call the establish and embed model, it's even harder to stay there. And right now we are actually spending a fair amount of time. I've published some work and will continue to do this on staying global, because with downturns and increasing challenges with terrorism, et cetera, there tends to be a black and white in or out mentality. And I would postulate that's not necessarily the case and not really good for the company. So I will spare you that particular soapbox material for now. But in terms of what we do basically strategic planning, stakeholder interviews, feasibility studies, market entry analysis, and then we can implement any part of that. We usually try to help build companies' capacities for themselves. We're hired either to bring expertise or extra hands or both. And so it can really depend. The two areas that I mentioned, global leadership development and global business development, right now we tend to market as two practices because it's not necessarily evident that they are a pipeline, but that's actually how we see them. We see that it's one thing to get to a market, it's another thing to stay there and compete. So we actually see this as a continuum, but it's an educational facet that I'm not necessarily able to support at this time. So right now we're marketing them separately.
Can you give me maybe an example or two of cases where you have helped a client expand their business internationally or retain their business internationally? Is there a recent project that you can talk about without naming names necessarily, but a project that has been particularly exciting or rewarding for you?
Well, there's a number. Lately, our projects tend to be a little bit more piecemeal, which is tough because you go in, you fix something, or you create something, and then you go. And that reflects the budgets. And as I said, in 2008, being U.S.-centered, it was dramatic to see U.S.'s responses. I think people probably didn't realize how big the downturn was going to be. I actually ran a volunteer roundtable for internationalization for the Business Marketing Association, and we had to close it because pretty soon there was no one to attend and no one to come speak because all of the international capacity building had kind of been wiped out. I mean, not, radically, but just over time, that's where a lot of the hits seem to occur. So from that time, it's been a lot more piecemeal work. In terms of the more sweeping projects you're discussing, we have done a couple. I think the most fun one was actually the one I was mentioning earlier, which was a while ago, but quite enduring, about establishing a Johnson & Johnson brand in South Africa as the gateway for the continent. It was challenging in a couple of ways. Apartheid and divestiture of U.S. businesses was not necessarily pervasive. So although Johnson & Johnson had a worldwide leading brand in everywhere except this one little place called South Africa, German companies had come in because they didn't hold the same political, ethical values about not investing in South Africa during apartheid. So it was challenging in terms of the competition landscape. And then there's also the emotional piece about how people feel. Some people really thought it was terrific that Americans backed the idea of a free society and, nonpartisanship, non-segregation. But other small businesses, you might be surprised, were really unhappy with Americans because it also meant they weren't getting supplies that they needed from American suppliers, and that really tanked their business. So it was a very complex environment just in terms of the business development piece. And then in terms of the training piece, as any liberating market, not just Africa, but anywhere, the educational levels were very uneven. That's one of the hallmarks that I've seen in doing business across emerging markets. So there were some challenges there, but overall very enthusiastic, very capable, just a sense of training and tweaking. And so that was really terrific to see that continue and endure. So I personally really think that global business is my opportunity to help with the public diplomacy side of connecting individuals to opportunities, particularly commercially, but also in terms of making the world more connected and communicating in a more healthy and open way. So all of my projects tend to have an element of that. If there's a bias towards guiding and strategy to be closed or open, I will tend to encourage open, although when it comes to things like intellectual property, not so much.
Can you talk a little bit about the marketing side of things? What role does global marketing play in the expansion strategies that you develop for your clients? Are there particular challenges marketing to customers in emerging markets specifically?
I think at the heart, we are a marketing company. And I will say that I think marketing also is defined in different ways by different audiences. So I notice here on the West Coast in the United States, it's often defined almost synonymously with promotion. Whereas I'm a very classical marketer, the old 4 Ps of product and price, promotion, placement, also known as distribution. So we are a full service marketing, full spectrum marketing company in that particular way. We actually go well beyond that, but that is our core strength. And marketing strategies that we devise leverage all of those things. For a long time, I was a classic marketer who left pricing alone. Then I decided that was crazy. There was competitive advantage to be had in that for our clients. And so I studied that and actually became an expert and have taught master classes on that. So it really depends on what the particular opportunities are. We use simple tools like SWOT analysis, which for your audience, probably very familiar, but just in case, it's a simple 4 square metrics where you have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Starting with something that basic, you get very clear. Of course, often an opportunity and a threat are the same, or a weakness might be the same. It's not as simplistic as it sounds, but it is a simple way to access next steps. We're also big planners with flexibility built in. Often small businesses, with whom we also work quite a bit, have said to us, we just don't have time to do that. And what I've observed is even if we start that, it ends up sometimes being a document. Like we'll be sitting in a planning meeting and someone will say, I think we should do this. And I'll say, that's a great idea. Here's how we can start right now, blah, blah, blah. We still need to put that in the plan. We want to have, in our view, living plans. They don't have to be 8,000 pages. They don't have to have gold leaves and look nice in a beautiful binder. I think far from that, really the opposite of that. But our particular view is the less money you have, and even the less time you have, the more you need to have a plan. And if it's 5 pages, great. If it only goes through this year, awesome. It's just really important for so many reasons, from everything from successful execution, because people want to run fast and free. Here in Silicon Valley, one of the premium values is fast. It often triumphs best. And that's a really interesting scenario to work in. One has to be prepared for that here and with tech companies. So really that idea of living plan is to me very important, no matter how detailed or not, just to have a document that we all agree on is how we're going.
Mm-hmm. So can you give me some very basic practical advice that you would also give to a North American SME or a startup that is thinking of expanding into foreign markets generally, or perhaps even emerging markets specifically? What would be some very basic first steps that you would recommend? What are some common pitfalls that you've seen people fall into that you would warn against? Where does one get started?
Well, what a wonderful question. I do see the 3 legs of the North American, so to speak, scenario, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. as being very different. So I'd be likely to give them very different pieces of advice. But there is some common ground at the very macro level. One is that you must be successful domestically first. I think this idea of global from the beginning is very good in terms of mindset, but not in terms of operations or implementation. First of all, it's costs way too much for anybody starting, even if you do something small. Secondly, you really have to prove yourself. You definitely have to prove yourself first. I did a wonderful talk with several experts at the recent Brand to Global conference that you mentioned. I really wanted to have a panel to explore building native web brands, because the internet for SMEs and startups is the best global marketing device ever created. Device meaning platform, ever created. It really creates a level playing field that when I began global marketing 20 years ago was barely around and not really leveraged. E-commerce was kind of poking its head through. So that's a phenomenal opportunity there. But the idea is that you really have to be successful domestically first. You want to work out the kinks. You want to get clear about your reputation, etc. That's just so critical. Having a global mindset, also very important, but aiming for too much too fast without any track record really can be problematic. We had a client from France that fell into that category. They were brilliant engineers, but they'd never done business together before. They left their companies to create a startup. They created a brilliant product, tremendous, but they never had a business together before, and they had never really been entrepreneurs at all before, and they wanted to come here right away, Silicon Valley. And it's a tech product that they had. So here they are coming to the World HQ for tech and still trying to learn about business at the same time. That's a really high bar to cross. So we really recommend that domestic piece. And the other thing is then getting really clear about how internet and e-commerce can work. Even if you're a services business like us, you can devise ways to make that work for you. Those would be my initial comments.
Lucie, what changes have you seen? You've been an expert in the area of global business and global marketing for 20 years now. You've seen a lot of changes. What changes have you witnessed that you think have influenced your field the most in terms of how global marketing has evolved, the trends that have influenced it? How has it changed since you got started in the business?
I think those of us who are deep and committed in this field are seeing the most dramatic changes of our lifetime in the last 6 months, and that would be the backlash against globalization as evidenced by the Brexit vote and the recent Trump victory. So I am personally, and we at NewComm Global are just beginning to absorb that. There were clear issues about staying global before, particularly related to terrorism, frankly, and also to a weaker global economy. And with these, what one might call backlash votes, we have to get really clear. I think we globalists have to get clearer about communicating our messages well. It's indisputable that when there's more trade, there are more jobs. And they might even just sort of equal out. It might be a loss of job A, but you get job B kind of thing. But there are so many myths and there's so much fear. And there are legitimate concerns about the how things are done. I wholeheartedly support that exploration. But first of all, I personally think we're too far to go back. I mean, globalization has been emerging for a long time and we're here. But I do think we have to pay attention to what might be primarily an emotional. I'm just beginning to research this. So in a way, I'm not prepared to answer your question, but I do know the next steps for answering it is to sit down and really look at, just like the election in the U.S., what did the naysayers want us to hear that we didn't hear? What are we not getting? And to what extent can those concerns actually be addressed in the frameworks that would provide effective commerce here? So that's the big thing I'm seeing is this incredible backlash. I don't even know that people realize that in Brexit, it's a fairly clear message. I don't know that it's become as clear in the U.S., but I think the two together make it very clear that we have to take a good look at what this globalization backlash is and what will it teach us going forward. So I just know a next step to your question as opposed to a polished answer. But to be honest, I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time in the lab to come up with that.
Yeah, I guess that sort of leads to my next question, which is kind of a tough one. But from your vantage point, where do you see the future of global business going at this point? Despite everything that's been happening in the news, with Brexit and now with the U.S. elections, do you see any opportunities for North American SMEs in particular that you think they should be more aware of?
Well, I think, obviously we're talking very broadly in terms of both geography and in terms of industries. But I think in general, one of the things SMEs really and startups really have going for them is their agility. It takes a while to turn around a large giant, no matter how awesome, or even to activate particular initiatives from divisions of large companies. And all of that needs to be addressed within the context of what is happening with this backlash. I went to a fantastic law firm, who shall be nameless for this call. They had a great seminar on trade and Brexit and what the implications were. As just one starting point to get a sense of what implementation issues are involved, Britain is online now to rename the tariffs. Okay, that means what other countries will pay for the import of their goods, every single product. They have to redo the tariffs for every single product they export. I mean, that's thousands. So that's just one tiny piece. I don't think anyone is looking to back off and stop trading. We are seeing decreases in, America has a trade deficit that we've been working on for quite some time. Other people are working on trade balances and so forth, and that's a whole other conversation that's complicated but fascinating. So I think that SMEs really have an opportunity in terms of their agility. The e-commerce piece is not really changing for them. It's disappointing to hear that TPP, which is a problematic bill, but I think personally, nevertheless, it's my opinion that it's headed in the right direction, or all these countries would not have been working as hard as they have. And so now we'll see if President-elect Trump actually is fully committed to dumping the whole thing, which I'm personally against baby and bathwater in just about any scenario. That was the saving of 18,000 tariffs. That's a lot of money. So for somebody commercially oriented, they might take a second look at that. I think things are up in the air for global business is the short answer to your question, and that always leads for opportunities. And SMEs and startups on a very generic basis are better equipped to respond quickly as a result of their agility.
So, Lucie, there are very newly published statistics by the U.S. government on the topic of SMEs. Can you maybe talk a little bit about those statistics and what they tell us about the potential for SMEs today who may not already be looking into exports, but who maybe are thinking about it for the future and what they can learn from these statistics?
As you know, we have Small Business Saturday coming up right after Thanksgiving. Will have just occurred by the time this podcast debuts. And so the State Department actually just published some very interesting data. They said that despite the fact that SMEs do export some goods and those that do grow faster, add more jobs, pay higher wages than those that don't, there's still quite a lagging. Over 2/3 of the new jobs in the U.S., as you know, come from SMEs. And these are, by the way, U.S. statistics, since you tend to create a North American scope. I just wanted to clarify that. So in the U.S., 98% of exporting companies are SMEs.
98%?
98%?
Wow, yeah, that's higher than I would have estimated. That's impressive.
It is impressive. And then here's the interesting thing. It kind of reminds me of our U.S. elections and the voting, who did and who didn't. Because although those who export, 98% of those companies are SMEs, however, less than 2% of all SMEs in the U.S. export. So that's a pretty big gap and what I would call an opportunity. The article said that it tends to be because of complex regulations and red tape. And that is certainly true. You know, and I know too, that most SMEs are really lean and mean and just very challenged to deliver on their basic promises and deliverables and so forth. So sometimes that extra level of complexity probably makes it a little bit more out of reach, or apparently a little more out of reach. I think there are some streamlining options. The other thing too is dealing particularly with tariffs and customs and things of that nature, which are, you know, different in each market, each country. And that, again, is another level of complexity. So I think also there tends to be a perception among the SME clients that we've talked to that it's only for big guys. It's only for multinationals. And, you know, e-commerce has made that a great playing field to start with. And then I think that's often a great bridgeway for SMEs, depending on, you know, whether your services are goods driven, to have an e-commerce entry and then carry on from there in terms of additional exporting. And then we talked a little bit about joint venture partners and so forth. So it can be a real on-ramp to lots of bigger and better things and maybe becoming a multinational.
So tell me a bit more about this article. This was published by the State Department.
Yes, it was published by the State Department on November 25th. It's one of their dip note bulletins, which I get regularly, and it generally tends to be more about straight diplomacy, so it was interesting. The author is actually William E. Kraft, Jr. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Trade Policy and Programs in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. So lots of interesting things there. And, you know, I'm always trying to get SMEs to consider the bigger picture. I tend to find it goes one way or the other. Either exporting and global business is off the table, or we're going to start and conquer the world tomorrow and forget our local market. So hopefully there's a happy medium where we get really successful in our local markets and leverage that as a springboard into bigger markets strategically, having a very strategic, systematic approach to how that happens.
Can you maybe point to a few good websites from the State Department or other government agencies where there is useful information to be found for SMEs, specifically for the ones who are interested in the possibility of exporting in the future?
Well, one quick thing to add to that in terms of your future note is that many of the large internet and e-commerce companies didn't even exist 25 years ago. I just had the privilege of compiling, assembling, and moderating a panel on native web brands. So it is really exciting to see how some SMEs, I mean, Airbnb was an SME once,
So is Uber. So it's really amazing to see how more than ever SMEs have an opportunity to grow and compete globally. Mm-hmm. So in terms of websites, I would suggest the U.S. Department of Commerce, actually. This is unusual for the State Department, but they also tend to work hand in hand on economic affairs. But the Department of Commerce at www.probablytrade.gov is a place to start. They have a few different websites. And they have a great guide called the Basic Guide to Exporting. That's one place to look. The Department of Commerce also has, and I am not compensated by them, they've been our clients once in a while, but I'm so supportive of their efforts. I want to be sure your audience knows this is strictly a personal endorsement, not a paid announcement. They have a number of country guides that are helpful. The data tends to be slightly old, so you'll want to refresh that. But they have excellent country guides, again, free of charge for any American company looking to move overseas. And that is helpful, too, because, again, it's not always clear where the matches are. We often have companies of all sizes saying, well, we want to start in the UK because they speak English. And really, Canada speaks English, and often the exchange rates and so forth make it a much better play than going to the UK, much as I love it there.
Well, that's really good advice, and I will actually add those links to the show notes, the links to those websites, because I think that maybe quite a few of our listeners might be interested in looking those up and seeing what kind of information they can find that might be useful for their purposes. And it's free information, and it's provided to you through your tax dollars, so you might as well take advantage of it, right?
Right. And I think also you're familiar with FITT in Canada. Mm-hmm, and I think that's a little bit different. I think it's quasi-governmental as opposed to governmental. I'll let you comment on that since you know them better than me. But I have really enjoyed working with them. I think they're very strong in terms of empowering all exporters in terms of information, up-to-the-minute data, global business suggestions. I have really enjoyed working with them strictly as collaboration marketing partners.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely add a link to the FITT website as well, because it is a very, very helpful website, as you say. And I mean, it's more for a Canadian audience, but that doesn't mean that if you're American or British or from anywhere else in the world, you wouldn't be able to find some valuable nuggets of information on that website as well. So yeah, always worth linking to that too. So, Lucie, is there any other information regarding that article that you were talking about that you would like to impart, just to entice people to maybe go and look up the whole article?
Well, I think the 2% statistic, that only 2% of SMEs in the U.S. are involved in export activities at this point. That is such an opportunity. You know, it does take a lot of strategy. I will say the other challenge, like we talked about earlier, and the need to deliver on current basics can be challenging because of the lean, mean environment of SMEs and startups. But it can be really worthwhile to just even pick one or two markets. Once you feel like you have done a good job domestically, to take one or two markets and just expand out that way. But the research is really, really important. And again, I know that time is the biggest currency in an SME. It really is important to make sure that you're going beyond the CNN headline level of research and really understanding what customers in a particular country are like, because there may be a parallel to customers here or maybe not. And so again, those cultural variances, for example, can make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think the opportunity is compelling, and I'm so excited for the other 98% of SMEs not doing this yet, because the world is their oyster, just, one bite at a time.
Yeah, and it's never been easier in all of history, really, for smaller businesses to get involved on a more international level. And with the digital channels that they have at their disposal now, and e-commerce, as you mentioned, I mean, it's a great place to start, and you can grow from there, but one market at a time also, as you say.
Yes, I will say one other organization. I mean, there are many international organizations that I think are terrific, far fewer than there used to be, I might add. But we've recently become members of the Global Chamber, which is, as it implies, worldwide, and does offer a number of webinars. They go beyond global business in terms of student case competitions and really wonderful community building entrepreneurs of the future and SMEs of the future. But lots of really great information, and both live and online. So that's another organization that has, again, a learning opportunity involved.
Excellent. I'll definitely look up their website and add that to the show notes as well in the links. Lucie, I really appreciate the time that you took today to talk to me and my listeners. I know you're very busy, and I'm also catching you right during the American Thanksgiving holiday, so I'm all the more grateful for your time. Now, for anyone who would like to find out more about you or about NewComm Global, where can they best find you online? Maybe mention any websites or blogs or social media accounts where they could follow you, and I'll make sure to include all that in the show notes for this episode.
Well, thank you. We have a website. It's www.NewComm Global. That's kind of a mouthful, but it's N like November, EW, C like call, O, M like Mary, M like Mary, Global, all one word, newcommglobal.com. It is a place to find out what's happening with us. And of course, you're always welcome to pursue our business opportunities and collaborations together further at hello@newcommglobal.com. Same domain name.
Excellent. And you're going to be at the South by Southwest 2017 event next year. And where is that being held?
It's in Austin, Texas.
Oh, excellent.
And I'm very grateful to be included in the panel speaking. We were selected to speak about tech women as a public diplomacy platform.
Fantastic.
I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm definitely going to keep track of that, and I wish you the best of success and a very happy and peaceful Thanksgiving weekend.
Well, thank you so much. My parents were from Montreal, so it would be great to make it to Toronto. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to collaborate with you and your audience in terms of building global ecosystems and partnerships. I fully support that and appreciate the opportunity to contribute.
Take care, Lucie.
Thank you.